The world is watching as a mysterious new illness begins to spread. People are scared and rumors fly everywhere. The illness, we later learned, was caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. But back then, people didn't even know its name. It was a confusing and terrifying time. Doctors were puzzled, hospitals struggled, and families feared for their loved ones. In those early days, HIV felt like an unstoppable force. And as fear grew, so did the stigma. Many people misunderstood the virus, thinking it only affected specific groups. People were afraid to even touch someone who might have it, afraid to be in the same room. Myths about the virus spread almost as fast as the disease itself. The idea of an HIV diagnosis was practically a death sentence. There was no cure, no clear treatment, and no real understanding of what was happening. Imagine living in a time where hope seemed so out of reach. In the early days, once scientists identified HIV as the cause of AIDS, they rushed to find any form of treatment that could help. At that time, there was only one option, a drug called AZT, or azithromycin. Originally developed for cancer, AZT was the first medication to show any promise against HIV. But the drug came with a heavy price. It was incredibly toxic, causing severe side effects, and patients had to take large doses several times a day. Imagine having to take a medication that made you feel sick just to try to stay alive. And the worst part? AZT didn't always work. For some, it merely delayed the inevitable. But AZT was just the beginning. Over time, scientists began to better understand how HIV operated. They discovered that the virus worked by invading cells in the immune system and turning them into virus-producing factories. Every time the virus replicated, it attacked more of the immune system, leaving people vulnerable to infections and diseases that a healthy body could usually fight off. Researchers knew that if they could slow down the virus's ability to replicate, they could give the immune system a fighting chance. This was a turning point. Scientists began testing other drugs to target the virus's different stages of replication. In the mid-90s, a groundbreaking development changed the game entirely. It was called highly active antiretroviral therapy, or HAART. This new treatment didn't rely on just one drug. It used a combination of several drugs, each targeting a different part of the virus's life cycle. The result? Patients could suppress the virus so much that it became nearly undetectable in their blood. It was a huge step forward. People were no longer facing certain death with an HIV diagnosis. For the first time, there was hope. Imagine being someone with HIV in the 90s when HAART became available. Suddenly, people could plan for the future, think about their careers, their families, their lives beyond their diagnosis. It was nothing short of a miracle. But this treatment wasn't perfect. It still involved taking multiple pills every day, and there were still side effects, nausea, fatigue, and sometimes even damage to the organs. Yet, for those who had witnessed the early days, it was like a second chance. Over the years, HAART improved. Researchers kept studying HIV, learning more about how it changed and adapted. They created better drugs with fewer side effects and made them easier to take. By the 2000s, treatment for HIV was becoming more manageable. Instead of a handful of pills, people could sometimes take just 1 or 2 a day. And as the treatment became simpler, it also became more accessible. With the help of international organizations and governments, life-saving medication started reaching people in low-income countries where HIV was often most widespread. At the same time, a shift in public perception was happening. HIV was no longer the mysterious, terrifying disease it had been in the 80s. People began to understand it better thanks to awareness campaigns, education, and advocacy. Celebrities spoke out, people shared their stories, and slowly, the stigma around HIV started to fade. Now, an HIV diagnosis was no longer the end of a person's life. It was the start of a new chapter, one where they could still live fully. Then came another huge breakthrough in the 2010s. Scientists developed what's called PrEP, or pre-exposure prophylaxis. This treatment allowed people who didn't have HIV but were at high risk of getting it to take medication that could prevent infection. For the first time, there was a way to protect people before they even got exposed to the virus. This was a game changer, especially for communities at higher risk. With PrEP, HIV prevention became proactive rather than reactive. It was another step toward reducing the spread of HIV and giving people more control over their health. As of today, HIV treatment is better than ever. People can take a single pill once a day, keeping the virus under control with minimal side effects. Medical advancements have also made it possible for those with HIV to have children without passing the virus to their partners or their babies. And thanks to continued research, scientists are even closer to finding a functional cure, something that could completely remove the virus from the body. Today, living with HIV looks very different from what it did in the 80s. A person with HIV can expect to live a long, healthy life, with the virus managed like any other chronic illness. The fear and stigma have lessened, and many now see HIV as a condition that, with the right treatment, doesn't have to control their lives. And perhaps most importantly, people now have choices to prevent, manage, and understand HIV in ways that were once thought impossible. But the story isn't over yet. Researchers are still working hard, pushing for a day when HIV may be entirely eliminated from the body. Every new discovery brings us closer to a world where HIV is no longer a threat.